Hello and welcome to Mind the Flat with me, Chris Heffernan.
Me, Amy Isles.
And me, Tom Crowther.
And today we're going to be talking about addiction. But before we go any further, we'd like your help to get more people addicted to this podcast.
Yeah!
So, this week, okay, after you've listened to this amazing episode on addiction, be sure to ask a friend to give us a listen. Because Tom will now say some exciting things about maths that if each of our listeners... Go on, Tom.
It's not an exciting thing about maths. It's just that if everyone that listens tells one other person, then we double the amount of people that listen to the podcast, and then we can get some better debates going.
So there we go. That would be amazing. So A, get more people addicted to this podcast, and B, get in contact, suggest topics for discussion, and maybe we'll be discussing them in the coming weeks. Right, our addictions. So, let's start off with Tom. Tom, what are you addicted to?
Well, I can't really phrase it as something that I'm like addicted to, but I feel like something that I should probably not be doing as much is swearing. I do swear quite a lot. I don't feel bad about it. I mean, I don't do it out in public, but I feel like it's probably something that I need to it's something I've had to kind of suppress doing this podcast, because whilst we're in our own home, what we're saying is going out to, technically the world. Indeed. And so I've got to watch what I say. And so it's kind of like it's a bit of therapy for me. Just having a conversation in a familiar environment where I have to watch the way that I speak. That's my addiction.
Brilliant. And Amy?
So I know what you two are expecting me to say.
Phone.
Yeah, I'm not going to say that. I know I'm probably slightly addicted to my phone, but I feel like a lot of the time when I'm on my phone is to be in contact with people with things that I'm working on. Because like doing a theatre degree, you have a lot of group work, and I'd say about 50% of the time I spend on my phone is talking to people about group work. Possibly.
No, it's
Chris.
not.
Just stop looking at me like that.
So is it? I mean, it's on Bumble, or it's just going through. It's just going through Instagram. There's not a problem. Okay, we're not trying to shame you. But I'm just saying that probably your biggest addiction is social media / your phone.
I've got to say, because like by that logic, because Chris does half a theatre degree, that would mean that 25% of the amount of time that Chris spends on his phone should be something related to group work or theatre.
But Chris doesn't always do group work projects. The last project Chris did in theatre was working with me, and we lived together. So, touche.
I think you may message people out, but most of the time I feel when you're in the kitchen,
yeah, I do spend.
You're on it.
But that's like my downtime. That's
no one's saying, like Tom said, we're not shaming him for swearing. That's just something that Tom feels
like
he does a lot
very
of.
Judged when I'm.
This is an open space to freely admit to what we find we just can't let go of. But go on, your actual one.
Yeah, so the one I was going to pick to try and be slightly more interesting is sugar. Like, I tried to give it up for Lent, and the first 3 days I felt like a zombie.
Just sugar, straight up.
It's like cocaine to me.
Warm it up on a spoon.
Oh dearie me.
But no, I just eat. Yeah, I felt really, really groggy. I really struggled, and I think I am addicted. I get really bad cravings for like chocolate and sweets. It's awful.
Oh, this feels kind of real.
Honestly, I think I am addicted to sugar.
I think people talk about like social media addictions as kind of like a bit of a joke, but
no,
yeah,
like, I feel
like actually a thing.
When I do essays and stuff, I delete social media off my phone, and I don't really miss it. I don't feel like I've got to check Facebook. I've got to check Instagram. I just do it because it's there. And
we're not very interesting to talk to.
Well, you said it, Chris, but but no, like sugar. If I don't, I do crave it at certain points in the day.
Go on, Chris. What's your addiction? I'm interested to see what you might come up with.
I think it's got to be chocolate. I'm always eating chocolate. Once I've started.
But you don't in the morning. See, that perplexes me.
See, I can get through the entire...
Eating chocolate in the morning?
See, I'm quite reserved, as in I will have no chocolate in the morning, a penguin after my lunch, and that's it. And then I'll have dinner. But then after dinner, like, I think 6 Kinder bars, easy. The other day, I opened one of those Crunchy Rocks packets, thought I'd just have a few. Next thing you know, the packet's gone in about 15 minutes. I was like, phew.
I think that's the thing with buying like a big thing of chocolate. It's very hard to stop. If you buy like individually wrapped bars, although I don't think you can empathise with this because you have the Kinder bars and you just keep opening them. Yeah. I feel like once you've opened one thing, then you've opened that thing and therefore you keep going. Whereas if you have to keep opening something new every single time, there's a kind of like a different response in your head going, should you be opening another one, which clearly Chris doesn't have.
Yeah, like probably I've had a Crunchy. I just eat one Crunchy. Yeah. But I'm probably eating about 3 times the size of one Crunchy by eating a whole packet of Crunchy Rocks.
Brilliant. This is why you're bouncing off the walls in the evening.
So yeah, I think that would be... I don't know if I'm actually addicted to anything else.
TV.
Oh, and then there's the heroin addiction as well that we've not spoken about.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you should probably get that sorted, Chris. It's probably not as bad as the chocolate, but... Boom, boom, boom. Mind the flat. Boom, boom, boom.
So we're now going to move on to some more serious addictions. So we're going to be splitting this into cigarettes, alcohol, and recreational drugs. And so we're thinking about, obviously some of them are legal, some of them are not legal, and where do we stand on that, and what do we think should be sort of the legalisation processes for the future. So I'm going to kick us off with cigarettes. So obviously you can buy them, they're legal, but obviously in lots of places they are now banned in locations. So not as a sort of a thing, but you can't now smoke indoors. So there's a degree of banning happening, but not complete on the purchasing. And after obviously our taxation episode, you could argue that almost the amount of taxes on cigarettes are almost a form of ban or leaning towards that.
Yeah, it's definitely disincentivising the use of cigarettes. I find it interesting because like in this country we do ban smoking indoors, but I mean I have to find a like way to feed this in, but when I went to Turkmenistan, they actually ban smoking outdoors. You can only smoke indoors. It's so weird. Like they don't.
Bizarre.
So their streets are immaculate,
right?
And everything is spotless in the capital city. So you can only smoke in like a private room. You can't smoke outside.
Well, see, I would quite like that because obviously when you're on the street and you're downwind of someone that's smoking, that's not. I don't like the smell. So for me, that's not particularly nice. But you can speed up. You can move. I find the worst one is on the beach. You sort of set yourself up on the beach. You've got your little camp, you're settled, and then a group sit next to you who are smokers, and you're just covered in plumes of smoke throughout the time you're there, because they will probably smoke quite regularly during that time, and then it's like, well, it's going to look odd if I get up and go and sit at that part of the beach.
Yeah.
Yeah, but obviously there is the issue of like, if you do enforce an outside ban, it's like a massive curtail on your on freedoms and whatnot.
Exactly.
So there's the two sides of it.
And I think obviously the reason for banning it indoor is because obviously the health risks of secondhand smoke are quite shockingly significant.
They're awful, aren't they?
So if you non-smokers who are exposed to secondhand smoke increase their heart disease risk by 25 to 30%, and lung cancer by 20 to 30%. So they're quite high.
Shocking.
And that's just from seconds. So obviously, you completely don't want it indoors. And I suppose outdoors, obviously it has less of an effect because it's dissipating. So for me, it's just more of an annoyance. But just like loud music.
Not something that you want to actively ban then.
In an ideal world,
in Chris's world,
just as I'd ban people that walk around with music blaring out of their cars, or
Such a granddad.
I just don't get it. We've invented, like headphones and everything. There's still people. I saw someone walking around with one of those like 80s
like
massive
boom
box. What are you doing?
I was on the train once, and it was quite quiet. There was literally about 5 people in this carriage and me, and this guy comes on, and he brings out this speaker, and I had my headphones in. I think I was listening to a podcast or something. He just starts playing his music out loud, and it got to the point where I couldn't hear my headphones over his speaker, and I said to him, like, he's quite a scary guy actually, and I was a bit like, should I say something or is he going to beat me up? And I said, like, excuse me, would you mind turning it down? And he's like, oh yeah, sure. He turned it down a bit. He was still playing it out loud, but I was like, what just goes through your mind to think that's an okay thing to do? Like, why would you think that everyone wants to listen to your music?
I mean, I stress incessantly about whether people can hear the music out of my headphones
Yeah,
on
so
public
do I.
transport, let alone actually playing it directly out
Yeah.
loud in the first place.
I just don't understand the brain process there.
So yeah, for me that's where I would level sort of outdoor smoking. It's an annoyance. I know it's not going to really probably damage my health, but I just find it really annoying.
Have you got some statistics there about how much it costs the NHS?
Go back to our previous episode, back on tax. So the cost to the NHS of smoking is £2 billion a year.
So that's a hell of a lot of money. Do you think anything should be done to kind of limit that further, or?
Well, I suppose you get into a very difficult predicament because at the moment, as we discussed before in a previous episode, a hell of a lot of money from cigarette taxes could go, in theory, towards the NHS to pay for that, the treatments of those people who have chosen to smoke, and that's led to their poor health problems. If you then ban cigarettes, which I think we should just say now is very much, we're going to be talking in idealised terms here, because
maybe not idealised, but theoretical.
No, I think idealised as in as much as far as a health perspective is concerned, it would be ideal, but it's not practical to ban it because it's so ingrained now and is so much a part of an everyday life that to put, how would you go about? So we're not going to get into sort of the practical methods of putting a ban in, but obviously if you were to have a ban on it, the chances are people would start growing their own tobacco.
Yeah.
They're gonna find a way of getting cigarettes. So you might still have the poor health problems, but you've not got that money coming in to pay for them.
Yeah.
But then equally, you could say that if it's banned, is it therefore harder to get your hands on it, and therefore will there therefore be many fewer smokers around?
A lot of it relies on how it's done, and the way that things are tackled, because if the narrative that goes along with banning something is that anyone that does this is immoral and that's a problem. But I think there's also the significant issue with like restricting people's liberties and that sort of thing, which seems like it's not that big of a deal, but walking around in a society where you're constantly thinking like, can I do this, can I do that, it does kind of weigh on people quite a lot, I think. So.
But I suppose the big thing is young people smoking, in as much as the younger you start, the more addictive the nicotine is, and the harder it then is to stop later. So I think some people say, so you're 18 and you think, oh, I'll start smoking. People think they will stop within 5 years, say, but it's so much more aggressive, the addiction, and so it's of the health issues surrounding cigarettes. You've got the high costs because of the taxes. Linking back almost to our tax episode, what more can be done in this area?
I guess tackling the root causes of addiction is, but like, there's again, it kind of relates to drug policy, but I guess what we're talking about here, in essence, is drugs and addiction, whether it's alcohol, tobacco, or recreational drugs. So there's an interesting experiment that was done by a psychologist, and it's like the rat park experiment. I don't know if anyone's heard of it. So what they did was they had a cage with a rat in it, one single rat in a cage with two bottles. One of the bottles would just have water in it, and the other bottle was, I think, laced with heroin. And the rat on its own would always choose the heroin water. It would keep having it, it would get addicted, and then it would eventually die from overdose or from starvation or whatever. But if you had, so they then created effectively a rat paradise cage. They had loads of rats in the cage. They had cheese. They had slides. They had loads of things to run around in.
Rat heaven.
Exactly, that's pretty much what it was. And almost none of the rats relied on that heroin water. They all used the clean water. And I think this is something that my sister told me about quite a few years ago. And it's the idea that the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. And there's an author called Johann Hari, who's written quite a lot on this. And it's the idea that the things that cause us to become addicted to something aren't the thing themselves, it's the thing in relation to our own social situation. And then there's like a human version of this experiment which he talks about, which is the Vietnam War. I think like 20% of US soldiers in the Vietnam War were using heroin. 20%.
Wow.
And obviously so many of the men in the US went to Vietnam, and so that's a large portion of US males using heroin. But then they came back, and I think 95% of them just stopped immediately.
Wow.
Because they've gone from a situation of isolation to a situation of connection. And so, do you see where I'm going? Like, it's not the actual substance. It's not just the actual chemical issues.
Completely.
Exactly.
That rat experiment is fascinating.
Yeah, I know.
Wow. Oh, I'm so pleased.
Please don't get any pet rats. I can't stand them.
That's just really interesting.
Yeah. I guess I'm just going to jump in with starting my section now then.
Yeah, go for it.
But like Portugal, for instance, they decriminalised all drugs in 2001. They effectively went from I think they had at one point 1% of their population was addicted to heroin. So 1 in 100 people were addicted to heroin, and all of a sudden they just decriminalised all drugs, which meant that people that were addicted weren't seen as criminals. They were seen as people that needed help, people that needed assistance. And I think that had a massive impact on the way that people approached help, the way that people were regarded in society. And I think there's an important distinction to make here, which is that there's a difference between legalisation and decriminalisation. So there's a whole spectrum from like prohibition, where it's completely banned to use or sell, to decriminalisation, which is it's illegal to sell it, but like in large quantities, but it's legal to possess it. Right. So you can have it on you. You're not going to be arrested for use. So if you are high on heroin, no one's going to come and arrest you because of that.
Yeah.
And then there's complete legalisation, which is the idea that it's legal to sell it. You can sell it in a safe environment and use it legally. And I think what Portugal did was the middle ground option. They decriminalised everything, which meant that, as I said, the healthcare benefits were that people could seek help and people were completely regarded in a different way in society. And I think it's now half the level that it was in 2001. So only 0.5% of people are addicted.
So it's not legalised.
It's not legalised.
So you can't like go and buy it.
You can't go to Boots
and buy it
and hand over a 50 and get some heroin for it.
But you could go to a medical professional and you wouldn't be judged a criminal for taking it.
Yeah, and I think the UK probably falls somewhere between the like decriminalised and prohibition sort of thing, with especially with recreational drugs, and harder drugs as well, which is like if you went to a medical professional, they would help you.
Yeah. But
if you were just on the street and you were found injecting heroin, then you would probably be that some legal proceeding would take place. You wouldn't just be left to your own devices. Yeah. So yeah, there's a huge difference there. And
sorry, I just something to feed into that. I was watching the news when I was back home at Christmas, and there was an article on it's a few months ago now, so I might be a bit rusty on this, but I think it was in Canada, and it was about drug addiction, and they were setting up these clinics for heroin addicts to go and inject themselves.
Yeah.
So it was like legalizing it in a contained area, and I found it really difficult to watch, because it was enabling them to feed this addiction, but like Portugal, they weren't being stigmatized for it, and they were talking to this couple who were able to go and like get a controlled dose at certain times of the day, or like when they needed it to kind of, because I think the problem with going cold turkey is that it's so difficult, and it fails a lot of the time. But I just could not get out of my head that it wasn't stopping their addiction. Like, they still had to go and inject themselves with these drugs, and whether that really was the best thing. But on the flip side, like, they had a flat, they were looking for employment, and they were progressing with their lives while still being addicts. And I think that's maybe me not being able to quite get my head around that being functioning.
Well, I guess that kind of plays into the idea of the whole connection thing, is that's an example where the people are hooked to the substance, but in allowing them to take that substance, you're removing those barriers and allowing them to form those connections. If society turns around to addicts and says, you're criminals, you're vermin, you don't belong in our society, and isolates them, there's no hope that they're ever going to get better. Because I guess the ultimate aim of drug policy would be to make people safe, and so with harmful substances like that, stop them from taking it, or help themselves to stop taking it. And so if that requires assisting them, if the end goal is to stop it still, then that should be done. And I think it's the moral kind of issue there, where people feel like this pushback by, as you're saying, like what almost feels like enabling a drug addiction. But the drug addiction isn't just the substance. The addiction is everything else that comes with it as well. And so you're not enabling the addiction, you're just enabling the use.
So what about then the actual legalisation of drugs?
Well, I think this is very contested, because obviously we don't have an empirical example of this. There's not a real world, or at least in the modern world, there's no example where there are widespread legalised drugs in sense of like harder drugs. But I guess we could look at
the softer drugs.
Look at like cannabis, especially in a lot of states in the US, it's now legal.
Canada as well now.
Yeah, but I think the difference is with cannabis is that it doesn't have direct health implications, or doesn't have strong direct health implications, or at least not in any way that substantially differs from alcohol consumption. In fact, alcohol consumption is significantly worse. People die from alcohol poisoning all the time, and as far as I'm aware, I don't think anyone has ever died from an overdose of cannabis.
No,
I don't think you can.
Right.
Like, it's like overdosing from coffee. Like, there probably is a point where you could physically overdose from coffee, but you would be more parts water than you would be human if you drank that much coffee to do that. And so you'd probably drown. I think you would drown before you overdose on caffeine.
But so if we're saying that, so the softer drug, cannabis, okay to legalise because of its health consequences, so you're then saying that you think that sort of the harder drugs should remain illegal because of the catastrophic health implications, but the decriminalisation to help people who are addicted through that.
I think I do fall somewhere in the middle, because I think there is definitely a strong argument for legalisation, because, for instance, if it's being controlled, if the sale is being controlled, then you don't have it cut with these like gross substances.
Yes.
I think that's another reason why I wouldn't want to ban cigarettes. And then also it's the same for alcohol. I mean, look at the toxicity of the alcohol that was sold during Prohibition in the United States. Like people, like moonshine, for instance, was not healthy drinking alcohol. And so by legalising it, the production becomes standardised, regulated, and you can have like a safe consumption of these things. But then there is that open accessibility.
So let's go on to alcohol then, Amy. And so I think alcohol is almost is actually becoming quite a good route to this, because cigarettes are legal, but we're very aware of sort of the health benefits, and there is a sense of stigmatisation, I think, emerging around cigarette smoking. Drugs, you've got the heavy stigmatisation, but these ideas that drugs keep people talk about, should we be legalising them? Cigarettes, it's should we be banning them? Alcohol almost is in this odd space of do people fully consider the health risks of the alcohol consumption that is very much ingrained, especially in British culture. Alcohol is really very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like, as you say, in British culture, it's like this pub culture, like, and I think you build up an intolerance to the effect of alcohol more easily than you do with, so like, people talk about being a heavyweight or a lightweight, and I think the more regularly you drink, the less it affects you when you do, and then obviously you consume more, and the health benefits are going to be great. The health benefits, the health risks are going to be greater. I've got some stats that you sent me across, Chris. Thank you very much for doing my research for this week. It says here, 40% of violent crime is linked to alcohol. That's a massive percentage.
Yeah.
When our other flatmate, when we had one of these discussions ages ago in the summer, said that I think if anyone came to Britain and like an alien who'd never been in Britain and sort of looked at the crime statistics, the first thing they would suggest is ban alcohol.
Yeah.
Because of just how destructive and expensive it really is.
I can't say for certain that it was related to alcohol, but I'm going to have a very decent guess at this. I was on the bus back from the airport the other day, and someone threw a bottle of beer through the window of the bus.
Crikey.
And it's like you probably wouldn't do that sober.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't do that at all. I think it's fair to say, but the fact that it was a bottle of beer is very telling. It's like that kind of alcohol has spurred this violence. I guess you can pretty much say that throwing a bottle through a window is pretty violent. This violent behaviour. But we don't see, like, people sit down just and have a glass of wine. And I mean, obviously there's a difference between how much you're drinking and the way that you drink it and the environment you're drinking it in. But still, like, people don't consider those sorts of things as the same.
Well, I think it is all about the perception of alcohol consumption, because I know, I didn't watch it, but Adrian Charles did a documentary about his alcohol consumption, and he was, I think, like 4 times over the amount of alcohol you should be drinking in a week. He was drinking.
It's like 14 units, I think.
But he was never drunk. He never went out on a bender and sort of got really drunk. It was a matter of he sort of maybe finished work and went to the pub, had a few pints in the pub, went home. At no point would he have described himself as drunk or having actively gone out to get drunk.
Yeah.
It was a social situation where you have pints and you drink that and you're not aware. And I think that is almost...
I think that's the thing with alcohol. It's the awareness, and like Tom, I'm sure I've certainly been there, and I'm sure you have as well, where you're at a social event, you're drinking away, and then you get to a couple of hours later, and you're like, oh my goodness, like I didn't. You don't realise until you've done it the effect it. And I'm not saying this is like every week. It's like once every so often. But I think it's very easy to get carried away with the amount of alcohol you consume, because it has that almost like delayed effect, and then once you realise I've had a bit too much, it's too late to do anything about it sometimes, and it does it really, that in that short length of time, it really changes how you act.
But I think almost that, do you think, sure, most people are aware of that I think people are aware of that.
I think sometimes you can be aware of that, but you still get, when you're in a social situation, you still get carried away inadvertently. Which is, I think that's when it can become dangerous, because you get yourself to a point where you can't go back and rectify it.
I think there's definitely a problem in university where people just go out to get drunk.
Oh yeah, there's such a binge culture.
The fact that people do that so frequently, it's like, it's almost quite scary how often people want to completely get out of their own head, and that scares me. And like, no one thinks, like, very few people think about that as like addiction or as a problem, and especially in a university situation. It's like I know loads of people that go out on a weekly basis, and it's like, but but why are you doing this? Like, some
Yeah.
people want to go dance, but you could do that sober.
Yeah.
Like,
But it's the phrase, isn't it? How often do you hear on quite a weekly basis? Oh gosh, this day I could do with a good drink. That's a very common saying, and it's not even, again, it's not coming back to this idea of having to even go out on a massive night out.
Yeah.
It's go home and I'm going to have a couple of glasses of wine. And if you are doing that regularly, that is having a severe impact on your health. That's not good.
Yeah, I do agree with you, but I think there is a difference in like having a drink after a long day at work or something, which like I can find quite like 1 or 2 glasses of wine. Yeah, it does have an effect on your health, but so does having a bar of chocolate.
Yeah, I was
every
just going
night.
to say exactly the same thing. Yeah.
But with binge culture, as Tom said, I think there is. It's almost perverse that there's that mentality of like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go out and get smashed tonight. Like, I've been there where I'm like, yeah, let's go and get really drunk. Like,
yeah, I think it's important to say that we're not here on our high. Well,
yeah,
like,
absolutely.
we're not saying, oh, look at us, we're perfect examples. Like, there's definitely been times where I've been like, I'm just gonna drink for the sake of drinking.
Yeah.
And it was like, I don't like the taste of vodka, but sometimes I drink vodka so that I can get drunk. And looking at it now, it's like, why do I do that?
Yeah.
Why did I do that? And yeah, I think no one's really perfect in this regard, but yeah, it's a bit scary how prevalent it is, especially in university.
And I feel like nightclubs as well. Like, I think there's less now, but there's almost like a mentality that you have to be drunk to go to a nightclub, otherwise it's not enjoyable. And I've been clubbing sober a couple of times just because I've had something on the next day and I've wanted to be out with my friends. And some nights it's fine being sober at a nightclub. Like, you just want to go for a good dance sometimes, and like you said a minute ago, you don't need alcohol to have to do that. But there's like this mentality of like, oh, you're not having a drink before you're going out.
But I think then the issue then becomes that if everybody else is doing it,
yeah,
you then feel isolated as the person that's going to the club or going out as the non-drinker. It's not that you all go out and you can all have fun because you're all on the same. Like, it's very difficult to have a conversation with a drunk person. It is incredibly entertaining when they try and explain things to you that you actually have understood for quite a long time. But it's not as fun on a regular basis to go out as a non-drinker with drunk people, because you're not connecting. And so I think that's where, if the majority of the group are doing it, then you're going to want to get involved in that. Not even just from the idea of peer pressure, of feeling pressured that, oh, you're an outsider. Just as far as your fun is concerned, you're not connecting with these people because they're in a different place.
I think that's definitely a significant problem in first year, because people are coming to, first of all, a new environment. They've got to make friends, and if everyone around them is doing it, it's like either you isolate yourself and you have issues, and then maybe you end up drinking because of your isolation, or you drink so that you're not isolated. But either way, there's a high pressure of you ending up drinking a lot, and that causes a lot of problems, I think.
I think that's the thing, that it's alcohol should be more put in a discourse of addiction, not as in, not to shame people at all, but to sort of to help people, to show that this isn't something that's just sort of a habit. It's something you do. It's a lot more deep rooted.
Yeah. Well, there we go then.
So I think that's it's that interesting blend of things like I said earlier, sort of recreation. If we go for the lower end of recreation, the softer drugs, there's this discourse around legalization, and almost because the discourse is so strong on addiction, it's wanting to pull it back. But then down the other end of the spectrum, you've got areas where the talk of addiction is much less, and we're wanting to pull that up. So hopefully somewhere there's this medium where we're able to talk about all these things as addictive substances, as problems, but not sort of the people that take them. I think we're still can be caught up in the idea of the addict as the problem. And it's something that
addiction.
I've just written an essay on opium addiction in the 19th century. And I think that's the thing, that you've got that similar thing, this idea of you should feel guilty because you are addicted, and that isn't the case. It's about not looking at it like that. There are reasons why a person becomes addicted, and then the substance itself latches onto that and channel stands. So I think it's about getting all those places into the same point. And hopefully that's got you really addicted to this podcast.
Yeah.
And you're now going to go out.
Get everyone else addicted.
Be a podcast supplier to
podcast pusher.
to your friends. Okay. Thank you very much for listening.
Boom, boom, boom.
Thank you very much for listening.
And if you want to get in contact, you can find us on Facebook. We're Mind the Flat Podcast.
On Twitter, we're at mindtheflat_pod.
And Instagram at mindtheflat_podcast.
And if you want to respond to anything we've said in this episode or suggest a topic for another week, you can head to our Reddit. That's r/mindtheflat.
Or alternatively, you can drop us an email at mindtheflatpodcast@gmail.com.